I brought a photograph that I wanted to show you today. I've kind of told you half the story, but it's actually a good intro to what I wanted to talk about today. This photo up here. So some of you have heard the story of how I had this dream in my riding days to breed a horse that would be absolutely outstanding. And there were talks of who knows what kind of international competition that I could have been capable of. And I had this dream to breed this horse, and that's him when he arrived. So one of my first tasks when he was born was to figure out a name for him. So his mother was part Arabian. If some of you will know something about horses, he was part Arabian. And he looked kind of from that lineage. So I decided, in order to honor that part of his genealogy, I would give him an Arab name. So I found a name, and this is what I called him. I called him Damon al-Hassan. And in Arabic, it means always the best. And I chose that because he was everything I had hoped for. He was a male, the color, everything was what I had dreamt of. And in my mind and heart, in those epic moments of thrill and of wonder of having this foal born, my mind and heart raced to competitions and this horse being outstanding. And I named him according to the dream in my heart. How many of you parents have done something similar with your children? That you choose a name and it's a picture of something in your heart and mind that you dream of for their life. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And isn't it funny how we like to name things? It's been part of our human history. We name the things we see. It brings order. It brings understanding into our lives. But a lot of the naming that we do is strongly attached to identity. So when you name your child, there's an aspiration in your heart that their identity will be something of what you've called them. Now, I think we can all understand that and get that right. Unfortunately, life doesn't tend to go in a smooth, plain sailing where that all just pans out, because bullies come along and start calling us a different name. And we end up with, rather than having names that are an aspiration for our well-being, they prove to be names that curse us and degrade us and humiliate us. And some of you may well have experienced that. And I think sometimes there is one step where we go even further to those bullies, and that's when we become our own worst critic and we begin to name ourselves useless, worthless, inferior, ugly. And that can become a massive problem when you join your critics against yourself. That's the root of where self-hatred comes in, where you begin to hate yourself because everyone else has. I think that's the greatest tragedy in life, is when we join our critics against ourselves. And that can be tough to shift, that one. So if I had to ask you a simple question this morning, what's your name? How would you answer that? Who are you that other people have called you? Who do you say you are? It's an important question. Now, folks, I've told this story to introduce a story I want to go to in the Bible. I've spoken on this story before, but I wanted to go back to it today to plumb the depths of it in a certain direction that I don't think I've done in the past. So some of it may be repetitive, so bear with me. But I'm hoping to get to a point of extremely critical challenge in our lives. that we need to be challenged with this one issue. Okay, so bear with me. I've called my message today, The Legacy of an Honourable Life. The legacy of an honourable life. And that's kind of the theme that we're going to be exploring. So we're going to be going to the Old Testament, and we're going back to the story of a man called Jabez. Now, before we hit the verses, I want to just give you some background. It's one of these extremely difficult passages in the Bible where it lists name after name after name. This fellow had 3 sons. They had 3 sons. And it just goes name after name after name after name. And then it pauses. And it gives in 2 verses a simple summary of a man's life that no one else got. He got that moment. And why? Now, we have to start with why were those names being given anyway? And the context is this. Israel had forsaken God and been overwhelmed by a foreign nation who took them away captive. So for 70 years they lived as exiles in a foreign land. After 70 years they were allowed back. They had pretty much lost their entire identity in this foreign land. So coming back, one of the first things they had to do was regroup and reestablish their national identity as Jewish people. And to do that, they dug out their genealogies, going right back to their origins, because that way the people would be able to rediscover who they were and their identity. So it's list after list after list on purpose to take them back to their origins, to say, this is who you are as a people, don't ever forget it. And in the middle of that, we stumble upon this man. So let's have a look at these verses, okay? 1 Chronicles 4, verse 9 to 10. It says this about him. Jabez was more honourable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez. By the way, the word Jabez means pain. She had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will be free from pain. And God granted his request. Now, this simple story, which we don't have all the details of, was given to reveal a man who was honourable. And yet his circumstances were awful. No one else got a mention of being honourable. None of those people listed in that list were chosen as honourable, except this one guy who possibly had the worst start to life possible. He must have risen above everyone else in some kind of stature of morality, standing, achievement, accomplishment. He surpassed all of them. And so for our sake, his story was mentioned, that we might take note. So folks, let's just work our way through that, okay? And unpack it a bit, all right? Let's consider the circumstances of his birth. So it says there that his mother named him Pain Bringer because she gave birth to him in pain. Now, we don't know what the circumstances of his birth were. It could have been a number of things. It could have been that in their relocation from this foreign land, they arrive in devastated Israel, and she discovers she's pregnant. The last thing she needed was a baby in the midst of all this devastation. And so she has this unwanted pregnancy, and it was a difficult pregnancy and a difficult birth, and everything about this child is a pain. And so she labels him with that curse. You're a pain. You've caused me grief. Maybe the father died in relocating. Maybe she's left as a woman on her own, now facing bringing up a child without a man. Was he illegitimate? I mean, it could have been any one of those circumstances that caused her to have this less than encouraging name for her son. And you know, in biblical days, names were often prophetic. They were often given as part of an identity for a child. So that, can you imagine growing up knowing that that's what your very own family have done to you? And how would that have affected him? How many of you know the story of Nicky Cruz? This guy from South America. It's such a great story. His mother, he tells the story that his mother looked him in the face one day and pointed her finger at him and said, "You're a child of the devil," when he was about 8 years old. And we know what that did to him. He ended up in the gangs in New York, killing people, drug addicts, all sorts of problems. So he's faced something like that. Okay, so how did he respond to that? Seemingly, he made a decision. He was going to refuse to be defined by his past. Refuse to accept what had been spoken over him for his future. And he turns to God in faith in God and asks God for certain things that would be the complete reversal of his start to life. So he says, "Oh, that you would bless me." In other words, reverse my misfortunes that have come across my way. Reverse them, God. Enlarge my territory. Prosper me. Make me successful, not this reject. Let your hand be with me. Come and be my companion in life. Let me not be alone. And keep me from harm so that I'll be free from all that pain that they've forecast over my life. And how did God respond? God granted his request, and he achieved those things. So folks, his reputation and story is listed there because he did what other people did not do. And folks, do you know what I want us to take note of here? Okay. We need to have an idea of what an honourable life is. If you hope to live an honourable life, what would that honourable life look like? Now, this is the way I reckon it based on this story. Okay? An honourable life is not one where you're born into ease and comfort and prosperity and have no troubles and trials, and you happen to be successful in life. For me, that's not honourable. An honourable life is like the one we've just read about. When you are born into adversity, when trouble and struggle and suffering strike you, and all the natural forecasting of a life like that would be to suggest that life goes nowhere, when that is what your natural inclination would be, to be a nothing, and you overcome all of that and go on such a swing to be the complete other direction, that's an honourable life. Someone who faced great adversity, great pain, great suffering, and overcame, that's an honourable life. Amen? He never fulfilled the natural trajectory his life should have taken. And so for you and I, folks, this is the challenge in our lives. How, when faced with difficulties and struggles and problems and suffering, can we respond to those things in such a way that would make us honourable people? That's the significant challenge for you and I. Now, can I just say, I am standing here looking out at this congregation, and I tell you what, do we have honourable people in this church? Because some of you have told us in private, some of you have told us your personal stories of what happened to you in your childhood. And we look at you now and we would never have guessed it. We've seen the things you've gone through and the things you've faced. And you're standing tall and strong. And you're honourable. That's what we've got to do. Just like Johnny did. You know, how to leave a church. Honourable. So folks, I wanted this morning to just pick up on the story and explore some of the key components that are necessary for you and I, should we ever find ourselves in situations like he did, to turn a corner and head towards an honourable life. That's what I want to plumb today. And I want to take you to a verse which for me, I found decades ago absolutely changed my thinking and set me on a pathway that I am eternally grateful to God for, because it has shaped how I try and respond in times of difficulty. So as we talk through this, I want you to think through the difficulties you've faced in your life, the problems you've encountered. And I want you to honestly think to yourself, how have you responded when you faced those difficulties? Okay, so I want you to have a look at this verse. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. This is not for the faint-hearted. Okay, some of you may want to throw eggs at me after this. It says this, the Good News Translation. Every test that you've experienced, trouble, calamity, suffering and sorrow, whatever, is the kind that normally comes to people. So realistically, yes. You know, I've heard some of your personal stories. Other people tell the same stories. We may have different stories of suffering, but it happens to all of us. Everyone goes through the same kind of things. Okay? But God keeps his promise. He will not allow you to be tested beyond your power to remain firm. At the time you are put to the test, he will give you the strength to endure it and so provide you with a way out of it. Now, folks, I don't know if you noticed that, but there is something in there that I feel is incredibly significant. And it says this, God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tested beyond what you can bear. Now, I don't know how you want to read that for your life. I'll tell you how I read that for my life. I read it that there is a filter going on in all the circumstances surrounding my life. That only those things God permits actually come my way. The ones he does not permit don't come my way. Therefore, God, who I trust, who is to me a good and faithful and loving God, will permit certain troubles in my life. But he promises he'll help me stand and get through that. Now, folks, what does that mean to you? Can I pose a question? If you believe that, and if you trust God with your life, and if you trust that he's looking after your life, and he thought it permissible to allow that in your life, what are you doing resenting the circumstances? How is it on one hand we can read a verse that says God permitted it, and for us to be full of resentment because of the things that have happened? Is it not incumbent upon us that if God has allowed this and promised a way through it, I should be looking at growing through this experience and becoming a better person, not a worse person? Correct? Should that not be the outcome? That I'm facing these troubles and coming out better, not bitter. Do you know what I think is critical, folks? And this is where you begin to plumb the depths here. Many people talk about this identity we embrace in our heads of being a victim. And a victim mindset is one where we see ourselves as a victim of the bad things people have done for us. In other words, I'm damaged, I'm broken, I'm a mess, mentally, emotionally, and every other way because of what you did to me. And so by blaming other people for the mess of our lives, we just establish fairly and squarely, I'm a victim. How does that tie up with the notion that God permitted the problem to bring about good in our lives rather than bad? How can then we see ourselves as a victim? I think seeing yourself as a victim is just the biggest excuse in the world to avoid dealing with yourself the right way. So we've got to toss the whole victim notion. Stop blaming people. If God permitted it in your life and in my life, then there's something in that for me to learn through and grow through and become a better person, a more honourable person. And folks, let's remember the story of Jabez, okay? Honourability is not possible in our lives unless we face some kind of adversity and we triumph over it. It's not possible. So I can't help concluding that the negative things that come about in our lives, God permits to make us better and to shape us to be better people. You think about it. Does comfort produce strength? Nope. Struggle produces strength. Does prosperity and ease fuel a sense of purpose in life? Nope, just breeds pride. Where does influence come from? Think about the people who have influenced you. Where does the influence come from? Comfort or from scars? You know, folks, do you know why it's so important we get a handle on this? Because if we can learn to respond honorably to troubles and trials in our life becomes a roadmap for other people. Amen? When we tell our story, it becomes a roadmap for other people. That's what Jabez was, listed in this genealogy, the one person who stuck out as an honorable life, someone that we can look up to. Because he made the right choices. I am not saying it's easy. But what I am saying, from what I read in the Bible and my understanding, that God permits difficulties in our lives, knowing full well that we can respond nobly and overcome. He would never allow it otherwise. Now, folks, can I just say something that's really hurtful and painful here? Because I know the reality exists. There is something of the mystery in this that we may never really understand and have an answer to the question why something has happened. We may never get that answer. I spent 3 years of my life railing my finger against God and saying, you owe me an explanation. You owe it to me. Why? And after 3 years, I never got an answer. But I decided on that day when I realized no answer was coming, that I would trust him. And trust that that would work for my good. And that's when I turned the corner. Can you see how we've got to do that? We have to trust him. When life hurts and you don't have an explanation or a reason as to why that suffering has come, trust him. It's the only way to turn the corner. you say, right, okay, I'll trust you, God. I don't have an answer why this has happened, but I trust you, and if I respond right, I'll come out better and more honorable than I was before. You know, psychologists talk about post-traumatic growth. How some people experience more growth in their lives as a result of facing some kind of tragedy and suffering than before. And you know, folks, unfortunately, the reality is amongst believing people like you and I, that trouble and difficulty very often exposes the real faith that people have in God, or the lack of it. Do you remember, how many of you were around when I told you in the winter how we lost our greenhouse? Glass shattered everywhere, absolute disaster. Well, I swore I will never have a glass greenhouse again, so insurance paid out, so I bought one with polycarbonate. So in April, we put up this beautiful, spanking new polycarbonate greenhouse in the back garden, planted all our veg and squashes and pumpkins and all things in there. It was way better than the glass one. You should have seen it. It was like a jungle, the growth in there. And then what happened? Jolly storm, what was it? What was that last storm we had in May? Yeah, that one. Guess what happened? Lost the second greenhouse. The whole thing absolutely collapsed. Again, I am fed up. But you know what was interesting? Was watching the plants. Because all of a sudden, all the shelter was taken away, and they were exposed to the elements. 3/4 of them never recovered. One little patty pan squash plant recovered and thrived, and we're eating the fruit of it. And one pumpkin plant has held on to its little pumpkin, which didn't grow much bigger, and we're hoping it's going to ripen. Recovered, continued being fruitful. I think the same fallout occurs in churches. People who respond positively and those who don't. So folks, do you know what I find in this whole story, in this whole thought? It's absolutely ironic that when you look at the life of Jabez, there was nothing about his life that would have forecasted any kind of personal success and prosperity. And yet he achieved it. Maybe sometimes we're all aligned a path in life where in order to bring about the honorability that God desires, we find ourselves born into difficult circumstances. And yet with God's help, we can fully recover. And if we can choose that faith in God, trusting Him, praying and recovering, then our lives can be a testimony to other people. So folks, I wanted to leave you with the challenge this morning to think through in your own life the absolute necessity, like Jabez, that we must choose to put our faith in God and to trust Him in our pain. And not be resentful to the negative circumstances that surround our lives. Have a look at this verse, James 1, verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Hands up, anyone who can do that. Hands up, anyone who has not yet perfected that. I cannot do that. I have to have my dose of eating worms in the bottom of the garden first before I even consider being thankful. Okay? But why would they say such a thing? You can only say something as crazy as that if God is in control and if all things are working for our good, not our harm. It's the only way you can say that. So we've got to ditch the whole victim thing. So folks, here for me is a checklist on what it looks like to lack faith You get offended. You're resentful. You blame people. You're angry. You're critical. You slander others. You gossip. And you're disillusioned. That is the conclusion I am forced to accept as a result of what we've read today, that is an absence of faith and a complete lack of faith. I read this week and it's jolly good. Listen to the statement. Your ability to be offended in the church and out the church is directly related to your spiritual maturity. How do you know that? Look at this verse. Proverbs 19, verse 11. A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory or to his honor to overlook an offense. A lack of faith means you get offended. It's more honorable to overlook those things. Right, I'm going to tie this up, okay? I think for all of us, this incredible story of Jabez and the verses we've looked at today tell us that pain may be our starting point in life, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence, right? Does not have to be a life sentence. If we choose faith and trust, we can know God's favor on our lives just like Jabez did, and we can recover, and something honorable can be built out of our lives. I don't know the depth of your pain. I don't know what things you have suffered. Probably no one will be able to empathize with your pain but you alone. But I do know the God who heard the cry of Jabez and answered his prayer, and he can answer yours too and bring about transformation. Amen. Trust him. Don't be a victim. Use every opportunity to become a better person. Right? Shall we pray?